Recently, I sent out a poll on my social media channels asking you which exposure mode on your camera you use most frequently. Overwhelmingly, the most popular mode came back as Aperture Priority. Now, as somebody who's been photographing in full manual mode for many years, I wanted to know if I was missing out on something. So in preparation for my Lake District Photo Walk weekend workshop, I set out with my camera to do a little bit of an experiment. I started off in the sunny woods surrounding Conishead Priory on the banks of Morecambe Bay near Ulverston, an absolutely stunning place to go in search of some brilliant photographs. To be honest, in this first comparison there's not a huge amount of difference. However, when you look closer, I just think that the Aperture Priority shot's dynamic range is a bit flatter. With the manual shot, it's just got a bit more contrast and oomph, giving more detail in the sky and drawing your eye a little bit more to the reflections in the pond. So therefore, I think the manual one has to be my favourite in this case. With the sun beating down through the ever more autumnal trees, I wanted to do a few more experiments surrounding contrast. In this comparison, I think I like the Aperture Priority shot more. With the emphasis on the highlights, it just makes the scene glow. However, with this one, I just think the darker background to the leaf makes it stand out more, so it's back to manual on this one. I'd soon made it down onto the banks of Morecambe Bay itself, and with the tide out there was lots of interesting reflections and eddies to train my camera on. With the next two comparisons, to be honest, there's not a huge amount of difference again. The Aperture Priority ones are slightly lighter, but I personally like slightly darker photographs, but each to their own, I suppose. From Conishead Priory, I made my way up towards Kelly Hall Tarn, a beautifully serene body of water in between Coniston Lake and the fells surrounding Coniston Old Man. I'm starting to see a pattern emerging here, with Aperture Priority favouring the highlights and me and my manual mode favouring a few more contrasty shadows. I continued to explore Kelly Hall Tarn, and amazingly the next two photographs that I took had exactly the same settings in both Aperture Priority and manual. Maybe this Aperture Priority thing was starting to take a hold of me. The next stop on my journey was the impressive Coniston copper mines, a really interesting find with beautiful landscapes and interesting industrial features to boot. With this shot of the youth hostel, we're once again returning to the pattern of Aperture Priority bringing out the highlights and me trying to tone them back with my manual settings. At this point you're probably screaming at the screen, "Tom, use exposure compensation to bring the highlights back." I would do, but to do that in my camera I have to hold a button down and twist a dial, and to change the shutter speed I just need to twist a dial, so therefore setting things manually for me just seems quicker. Here's another shot where the settings were absolutely identical. It seems that when we're in less contrasty situations, my manual interpretation of the scene is pretty much the same as what Aperture Priority would set as well. It was time to leave the copper mines behind and head to my next destination, the impressive chasm of Hodge Close Quarry. It was here where I was going to test Aperture Priority with lots and lots of intense contrast. These next two comparisons for me show off some of the flaws of Aperture Priority. If you don't really understand how to meter light and set all of your settings manually, then you are going to overexpose your photographs in these situations. So sometimes it does pay to switch around to make sure that you get the exposure absolutely spot on. As I left the quarry and took a few final shots, I couldn't help but think that if I wanted quick photographs in low contrast situations, then aperture priority might be an option. But for me, manual mode just helps me to keep in control of my exposures and know that I'm going to get exactly what I want to get. So, will I be turning my camera's exposure mode dial from manual to aperture priority anytime soon? No, I don't think I will. The fact of the matter is, I've been using manual mode for years now, and it's just what I'm comfortable with. I think that's a really important point. I don't think we should choose our exposure mode based upon one being more sophisticated than another, because ultimately they all do their own jobs in different ways. I also don't think that we should choose it based upon the fact that our favourite YouTuber uses it, so therefore we have to as well. At the end of the day, we have to make our own decisions and choose the mode that works best for us. However, at the same time, I don't think that we should use aperture priority to cover up gaps in our knowledge. Let's just stick it in aperture priority because I'm not quite sure how shutter speed relates to all of these other settings. I think understanding how those exposure triangle settings work together is an absolute fundamental skill that all photographers should have. If we learn how our cameras work first, it'll make the decision on which exposure mode to choose ever so much easier. It'll even help us to change exposure modes for different scenarios, which can be really helpful. Also, it means that you can pick up pretty much any camera, even one of these manual film cameras on the shelf behind me here, and be safe in the knowledge that whichever mode you use, you're going to get the best exposure every single time. So, if you weren't involved in that original poll, then please share with me your favoured exposure mode in the comments section below. Who knows, this video might have even changed your mind. If you want to get going on that learning process of which camera settings to choose, then you better watch this video next, because it will help you to start that process off. If you've made it this far in the video, then please give it a like to help me to share the channel with more budding photographers like yourself. And also, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. I look forward to seeing you again soon. But until then, it's bye for now.